Every morning, we enter a world already in motion. We pass hundreds of people, strangers beside us, across from us, moving in the same direction, if only for a little while. We notice the coat, the coffee, the phone, the face. Sometimes we notice a smile. Sometimes we notice someone who looks tired. Sometimes we notice nothing at all. And from these small glimpses, we quietly imagine we understand what we're seeing, that she's doing fine, that he's got somewhere to be, that they're simply having another ordinary morning. But a life cannot be understood from a glance. Behind every face is a story already in progress, a worry that began before we arrived, a hope we know nothing about, a loss no stranger could recognize, a question someone may be carrying alone. The calculation begins before she can stop it. What can wait? What can be stretched? What can be moved to next week? And what happens when there is nothing left to move? 5 days suddenly feels very short. She has made this commute more times than she could count. Same train, same morning rush, same familiar journey toward another day of work. To anyone looking, she is simply another woman on her way somewhere, composed, professional, getting on with her day. There's a strange comfort in routine. Wake up, get dressed, catch the train, go to work, keep moving, and perhaps no one stops long enough to ask what it takes to keep moving. $287.16. 5 days until rent is due. Sometimes an entire life can narrow itself down to 2 numbers: what you have and what you owe. The calculation begins before she can stop it. What can wait? What can be stretched? What can be moved to next week? And what happens when there is nothing left to move? 5 days suddenly feels very short. Around her, the morning continues exactly as it did before she looked at her account. Someone checks a message. Someone watches the city pass. Someone thinks about the day ahead. No one around her knows that her morning has just changed. Why would they? So she does what people learn to do when life cannot stop, simply because they are afraid. She gathers herself. She puts the worry somewhere no one else can see it, and she continues toward work. Perhaps someone will speak to her today. Perhaps someone will ask how she's doing. And perhaps she'll say she's fine. He boards the train and becomes another face in the morning crowd. Headphones on, backpack over his shoulder. Nothing about him asks to be noticed. Around him, people share the same carriage but live inside separate worlds. Then he notices 2 friends. One says something. The other laughs. It is an ordinary moment between people who know each other well. The kind of moment most of us would never think twice about. But sometimes seeing connection reminds us of its absence. He looks away, but the thought follows him. So he reaches for his phone. There are people he could message. People whose names still sit beneath the word friends. People he has laughed with, spent time with, promised to see soon. But life became busy. Schedules stopped aligning. Soon became weeks. Weeks became months. And somewhere along the way, Reaching out began to feel a little more like asking to be remembered. He tries anyway. One message, a small invitation, a quiet hope that someone might have room for him this time. But the message sits there unanswered, and eventually waiting for an answer begins to feel worse than pretending he never needed one. So he deletes it, puts the phone away, and looks out the window. The friends behind him are still talking. The train is still moving. Everyone around him is still going somewhere. Nothing about him has visibly changed. That is the strange thing about loneliness. It does not always look lonely. Sometimes it looks like headphones and a morning commute. Sometimes it looks like someone standing in a carriage full of people. And sometimes the person who feels most alone is standing close enough to touch, while none of us ever know. He takes a seat by the window and becomes another passenger on another morning train, an older man with somewhere to go, a bag on his lap, a life no one around him knows. Then he notices them, two people who have clearly spent years learning the small language of each other. She reaches over and adjusts his scarf. It is a simple gesture, familiar, almost forgettable. But some gestures carry the memory of 1,000 others just like them. For a moment, he smiles, because once there was someone who knew his small things too. Someone who knew how he took his coffee, which stories he would tell twice, what made him laugh, when he needed silence. Someone whose presence became so familiar that imagining its absence once seemed impossible. He reaches for his wallet. The photograph has been carried for years. Its edges have softened. Time has left its marks across the surface, but there they are, younger together, smiling at a future they could not yet know would one day become a memory. He looks at her face, and for a moment the years between then and now disappear. Love does not disappear when someone does. It changes shape. It becomes photographs kept close, habits with nowhere to go, memories awakened by ordinary gestures between strangers. It becomes the instinct to turn towards someone who is no longer there, and the empty space that answers. To everyone around him, he is simply an older man looking out a window. They cannot see who once sat beside him. They cannot know what that empty space still holds. Because grief does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply sits quietly among us, carrying a love that has nowhere left. The train continues. Another stop, another platform, another group of strangers stepping on as others step away. The faces change, but the carriage remains full. Someone reads, someone scrolls, someone watches the city pass beyond the window. Someone is thinking about where they are going. Someone else may be wondering how they will make it through the day. We cannot know simply by looking. A number in a bank account, an unanswered message, a photograph carried close. These are the battles we happened to see. But look around. What about the ones we didn't? The woman sitting quietly across the aisle, the man staring through the window, the person checking their phone, the stranger who smiled when they boarded. Every person in this carriage has a life that began long before they entered our view and will continue long after they leave it. We cannot fix what we do not know. And perhaps noticing does not require us to fix anything at all. Perhaps it begins with something much smaller. To look again, to resist the certainty that what we see is all there is. To remember that the stranger beside us is living a life as complicated, fragile, hopeful, frightening, and precious as our own. Because the person you pass tomorrow may be fighting something you will never see, and you may never know their story. But you can remember that there is one. So the next time you find yourself surrounded by strangers, look again, not to judge, not to assume, not even to understand, just to remember that there is always more than what you can see. And ask yourself, how many invisible battles do we ignore every day? We will never know every battle being fought around us. We will not always recognize the weight someone carries, the loss they live with, or the loneliness they have learned to hide. But perhaps we do not need to know someone's story to remember that they have one. So when you pass the stranger beside you, look again, not to judge, not to assume, not to fix, simply to see. Because sometimes being seen begins with someone choosing to notice. And tomorrow, when the world is moving quickly and everyone appears to be just another face in the crowd, remember, there is always more than what you can see. How many invisible battles do we ignore every day?